Good morning. I guess it looks like we've got all we're going to get this morning. Welcome to our pre-meeting seminar. This is about applying unique identifiers to understand and establish influence. And we've got a great panel here of 4 speakers, and I'm just going to take a little bit of time to set the stage, give a little bit of background. Let me show you a little bit of how the morning's going to go. We've got noon. I'm going to do an introduction. Hi, I'm Helen Atkins. I work at the American Association for Cancer Research. I'm the editorial director there. And we're going to speak in this order. Lori Hack. I'm sorry, I just asked you and I screwed it up. Lori Hack. Sorry about that. Is going to speak first, then Ellen Rotenberg, Greg Gordon. Then we're going to have a networking break, and that'll be around 10 o'clock. And the whole group, all these seminars are breaking at the same time. So I'm told that they'll have some caffeine for us at that point. And that'll go from 10 till 10:30, and then you and Adie will speak. And then we've left a good amount of time, about an hour, for an open discussion. I know the panelists, we had a little bit of a discussion ahead of time on the phone, and I think they're all anxious to ask each other some questions. But we're hoping also that the audience will get involved as well. So we'll have some time for questions after each individual speaker, but then keep in mind that we're leaving an hour at the end so that we can have a broader discussion of some of these issues. Once we break at 12 o'clock, there is a lunch provided for everybody, so everything's networking. We have a networking break and a networking lunch. So I'm going to just set the scene a little bit and talk about identifiers really briefly, and then about names a little more in depth. So there have been identifiers around for a very long time. I mean, there's nothing new about ISBNs and ISSNs, membership numbers, grant numbers, lots and lots of identifiers. But in a digital world where everything's online, we have different expectations, and we want them to do different things, and we want to be using them in new ways. So we want to be able to find an item and know it's what we expect when we get there. We want to be able to co-locate items that have things in common, like the same author or the same journal, or something like that. So in order to enable that, it became clear that we needed IDs to be truly unique. We need them to be interoperable, so they have to work in different systems from place to place, different databases, that kind of thing, different contexts. They need to be persistent over time. They can't just change. So, yes, that's the reason URLs don't work. URLs go away. And they have to be actionable. And I think that's really the key. You have to be able to take that identifier and do something with it. So, we've been talking about this for a while in discussions with publishers over the past 15 to 20 years now. We've gone through the development of the DOI, the Digital Object Identifier. And even in those early discussions, which, dating myself a little bit, I was part of, even in those initial discussions, there was the recognition that eventually we're going to need identifiers for a lot of things, including people, and that this was going to be increasingly important over time. So let me talk a little bit about names. So names, well, we think our names we're unique, so we assume our names are unique, but in fact they're not. Lots of people have the same name, and maybe not my name. So my name's pretty unique, I've found. But for example, I searched for Greg Gordon in LinkedIn last night, and there are 21 records. Now, I assume you haven't registered with LinkedIn 21 times. Even with 2 G's at the end of his first name, there are 21 people there. Okay. And that's nothing to say of a Smith or a Jones. So think about what happens in other countries, in other languages, where you have just simply very few family names. For example, Lee in China or Kim in Korea. So there are just so few opportunities to have truly distinct names. And names aren't persistent. So if you think about, especially, this being true for women historically, who start their professional life with one name, they may get married and take their husband's name, so they're publishing under a different name, and then they get divorced, of course. So their name might change back again, and then, well, who knows, they might remarry once or twice after that. And so their names don't stay the same over time. I remember I worked at ISI years ago, and I had people call me on the phone and say, well, how come you can't track who I am? And I said, well, who are you? And they explained, and I said, well, but you've changed your name. How do I know that you're the same person? You might change jobs, so I can't always know that you're the same person at Harvard. People go from place to place. So then there's this consistency from system to system, which may be in the digital world even more important. So, over time, authors haven't been consistent in the way they've presented their own names. So sometimes it's their own fault. Sometimes they use a middle initial, sometimes they don't. But when it gets to the publisher might have some policy. Some publishers use a full name when they present the title page of an article. Some only use initials. Some change it a little bit. When they send that made-up page out to a vendor to have the XML created, does the XML vendor know what's the last name and the first name? How careful are we being? And how consistent? So when that article gets to a database vendor, they have their own rules about how they connect names, and can they tell if they don't have, say, the XML, or maybe it's the XML is incorrect? Do they know where the first name ends and the middle name begins and the last name begins? So all of those things can create inconsistencies even for the same item, the same article, much less the same author over way different presentations. And in addition, also in this same sort of vein, names that are presented in foreign languages that use non-Roman alphabets, like Chinese or Russian, for example. Transliterations may vary. There are different systems for transliterating Chinese, for example. And some of those things also have changed over time. New standards emerge. So, okay, good. So why are they important, though? Why is this becoming more and more important? Money's tight. That's one main reason. As there's increasing competition for research funding or institutional funding, jobs, promotions, things like that, the need to establish people's identities becomes more and more critical. For an institution, it's both at the person level and at the institutional level. The institution may need to look at how their own faculty are doing in order to justify funding. And there's this increasing importance on establishing your brand and knowing and being able for other people to know, what have you published? How many citations have you garnered for those publications? And what journals have you published? What society affiliations do you have? And have you made significant contributions to those societies? Can you track those? What kinds of research funding or grants have you received? With whom have you collaborated? Where have you worked? All of those questions become more and more important. People might say, well, but I have a CV. All they have to do is ask for my my resume. I can give them the list of everything. Well, that would be nice if you knew every time you were being evaluated, but you don't. You can't control that. You don't know when your institution is doing a research evaluation exercise. Whole countries do this, whole systems. These have been in place for many years in places like the UK. Also in Germany, institutions do this as well. All of these places are trying to show their return on investment. How are we doing? And it's impractical to work from a pile of people's CVs. And of course, we know that what's on a person's CV may actually be selective or maybe somewhat embellished. Everybody lies. I know that because Greg House told me. And again, the stakeholders are many. We've got all sorts of people out there who are concerned about this and working on various aspects of it. And the stakes are high. People's jobs are at risk. Their funding, their salaries may all be dependent on the evaluative metrics that other people are using. So it's important to an individual to know that whoever is evaluating them is using good data. So I think we all have an interest, both at the institutional group level and at the personal level. As publishers, and especially as society publishers, we're interested in who's publishing in our journals. Are they members or not? Are they also reviewing for us? Can we make that connection? Sometimes the systems we use, we've got all these names in these big databases, but we get, well, I know in our system, we get lots of duplicates. Can we tell that this person who reviewed this article is the same person who wrote these 2 articles? And we may have another place where they've used a different email address. They use their home email. They use their work email. They move from Dana-Farber to MD Anderson. Are we sure it's the same person? So these are all, so it's been my function this morning to tell you what all the problems are. And I'm hoping that some of our panelists are going to be able to show us some of the applications that are emerging that are going to help us solve some of these problems. So I'm interested as much as you are in hearing what they have to say. So Laurie, why don't you come up and start us off